Hello, I am Kayt Sukel, and we are moving from organization to orgasm. So hopefully you're okay with that. Maybe we can use some of Daniel's tips to bring more orgasms to your life. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens in your brain when you are having sex, primarily when you have reached the point of no return and have had an orgasm. But to start, when we approach things scientifically, we need a definition. You always need a definition so you know what you're studying. So what is an orgasm? Think back to the last orgasm you might have had, last week, last night, in the theater bathroom, although I wouldn't tell the theater people about that. Think about what's actually happening. It might be kind of hard to define. We have a lot of words for orgasm. We talk about climax, release. The French have the best with le petit mort, the little death. But what really is happening inside your head? Well, Barry Komisarek, who is a researcher who's been studying the orgasm for years, came up with the quintessential scientific definition in his Orgasm Answer Guide. And for him, the orgasm is a buildup of pleasurable body sensations and excitement to a peak intensity that then releases tensions and creates a feeling of satisfaction and relaxation. Sexy. It's a good starting point, but again, what is happening in the brain? My friend Sarah says that she thinks, especially with men, the brain actually completely dematerializes at the point of orgasm. Maybe has something to do with the snores of her boyfriends. But researchers are now trying to figure it out. What's going on? And if the brain is the biggest sexual organ of all, what can we learn from this very human and this very motivating phenomenon? Of course, it's actually not that easy to study sex. If you got an actual sex researcher up here, they'd say funding is the biggest problem. But there's also some logistics. People from the Informed Consent Committee kind of look down on college students having sex in lab rooms with people watching. Also, there is the matter of cleanup, which can be a little more complicated than you might think. And the other thing is, and I don't know if any of you out there are fans of Masters of Sex, the TV show, but they sort of hint at Masters and Johnson getting a little bit of professional ostracism for studying this. But in reality, it's actually much, much more. So for a lot of researchers, they want to stay away from sex. It's something that's taboo. We don't want to know about. But as I said, these researchers are learning that sex is really, really related to the brain. In fact, it is possible to have an orgasm by thought alone. In 8th grade health class, you learned all about nocturnal emissions. Some people report having crazy sex dreams during pregnancy. There are individuals, when they have epileptic seizures, they finish with a climax. There are individuals who have brain damage after surgery or a head injury where they orgasm all the time. There's just a story on the news about a man who has persistent orgasms and has orgasms like 9 times a day. And there are also people who can actually think off. They can sit, they can fantasize, and the total hands-free moment get themselves to orgasm. So if none of these nether regions are required, maybe our understanding of orgasm shouldn't be focused on the genitals. Maybe it needs to be focused up here in the brain. So a lot of the focus has been on female orgasm. It's been debated actually for a long time whether or not women could or even should have orgasms. For men, it kind of made sense. They needed some help to get the ejaculation going so that they could release the sperm that could then find the egg. But women, what do we really need orgasms for? And so it wasn't really looked at. But these days, with neuroscience, especially neuroimaging, there's a new way to study human sexuality and look at why some women have lots of orgasms, others don't. How much of it is biology? How much of it is societal norms? How much of it is what's in our head versus what's in our, down below? So Barry Komisarek's lab, as well as other labs, Janneke Jordis's in the Netherlands, has been trying to measure it through neuroimaging. This is an fMRI scanner. And when I was doing my research for Dirty Minds, I interviewed Dr. Komisarek, and I asked him, okay, so what actually happens when, people go in there? What are we actually going to learn? And he said it's important to look at orgasm because we can learn, is there a specific time course? Is there sort of a pathway in the brain that shows how you go from touch to pleasure to climax? He's also very interested, because his wife actually died of cancer and was in horrible pain at the end. Is there a way that we can leverage the pleasure pathways in order to find new treatments for pain, chronic pain in particular? But then he was also really interested in activation in prefrontal cortex. This part of the brain is part of the executive control system. It is the seat of judgment, morality. It's basically sort of what separates us from lower order mammals. And if there is activation, it may be something that we can teach. So it's not a matter of fixing the brain so women can have orgasms, but simply teaching them how to do it better from a top-down fashion. So I talked a little bit about how Dr. Komisarek was, inspired by his wife's illness. So these are all images courtesy of Beautiful Agony, where you can upload your own climax photo if you are so inclined. But what's interesting about these faces is, making your O face, it doesn't look all that comfortable. In fact, there was a photo my ex-husband took of me when I was giving birth that looks an awful lot like this, and I gotta tell you, I made him delete it because it didn't look like I was having any fun at all. So the idea is we see so many overlaps when you get to the crux of pain and the crux of pleasure. You see the same areas of the brain light up, but what makes the difference? What makes a sensation pleasurable? What makes one painful? And if we can look to the brain and see the differences at these different times, maybe we really can find different ways to treat pain. So one of the first studies that looked at orgasm looked at men and women. They were in a PET scanner, which is sort of an earlier version of neuroimaging. And they found that actually, when it came to orgasm, all these individuals they individually stimulated themselves. There was a lot of overlap in terms of what brain areas lit up. The differences between men and women weren't that big, actually. What you saw were mechanical differences. So areas of the brain that you had to use to work the penis, to handle ejaculation, those were different in the men. And there were some slightly different sort of mechanical differences in the women. But in this particular study, they didn't see any prefrontal cortex activation. Why might that be? So if there is this thin line between pain and pleasure, as Dr. Komisarek believed, this could see a change in consciousness. This could be that little change that tells a neuron to be aware and governs how we feel. So he wanted to look at it as well. He wanted to use MRI because it's a little bit faster, it's a little bit smarter, and it has better resolution, and see if maybe he could find that prefrontal cortex activation he thought he'd find. So in order to really understand what he was getting at, I volunteered to be a participant in his study. So I get asked about this a lot and how you prepare to have an orgasm in an fMRI, besides have lots of cocktails first, is you have to practice staying very, very still. And I did. I actually taped a cat bell to my head in practice. Now whenever a kitty walks by, I have kind of a visceral reaction. Absolutely no metal. Not allowed, and you really have to keep your sense of humor because it is the most ridiculous thing ever. You also have to understand that it is going to come up on every first date. My husband's sitting in the audience, and we talked about it on ours. It will never leave you. In fact, fMRI Orgasm Girl will probably be on my tombstone. But I got the job done, and these were the results the researchers saw. That's my brain on orgasm. And as you can see, it really is kind of a whole brain experience. There were over 30 discrete areas of the brain that were activated from the beginning to end of my climax, starting with genital sensory cortex, then lighting up the hypothalamus and the thalamus, moving on to the substantia nigra, which releases dopamine, the so-called pleasure chemical, and then ending with that prefrontal cortex activation. And if you don't want to take my word for it, can you play the video, please? Here is a time-lapse video of what happens. This is not my brain, it's Nan Wise's. But what you can see, again, is that at the point of orgasm, the brain is lighting up like a Christmas tree. The brain is not completely dematerializing, as my friend Sarah thought. In fact, there's blood going everywhere. And it raises the question, what kind of secrets could orgasm maybe tell us about other processes? About the difference between pleasure and pain, about changes in consciousness, about sex as a primary human motivator. So what these researchers found was there were a variety of cognitive, emotional, and sensory components to orgasm. It's a complex thing. It's pretty complicated. And actually, more recent studies that have been done have shown over 80 discrete areas of activation. So it's funny, when I give talks or write articles, I always get the one commenter that says, so what? Why are we wasting researchers' dollars on this when we could be like curing cancer? Well, again, people like sex. Most people anyway. I'm guessing most of you do. I won't ask for a show of hands in case your mom is watching on the live stream. But it may provide us a way to help people with anorgasmia, or people who are unable to have orgasms. By learning the time course in the brain, we can provide neurofeedback that can help them figure out how to use their brain to make their bodies work better for them. Again, it is a potential target for novel pain treatments. If we can figure out what is it about those areas of the brain, what little change is happening that makes something painful versus pleasurable, we may be able to come up with something as an alternative to opiates. The other thing is, a lot of depression, neuropsychiatric disorders, these all have elements of anhedonia, or a lack of joy or pleasure. Maybe within the understanding the orgasm, there are things there that can help us better treat depression, to better treat anxiety disorders. And then also, you know what? We like sex. When we're not doing it, we're thinking about doing it. And so a better understanding of why it motivates us so much, why it compels us so much, also probably wouldn't be a bad thing. But also, sex is part and parcel of love. And we like love. We're romantics. So without the orgasm, we might not get to the whole baby-making portion of the program. It's important to help us propagate the species. We can learn more about the release of chemicals like oxytocin and dopamine, which is linked to monogamy, but also to, again, neuropsychiatric disorders, autism, and other things that may help us understanding pair bonding and social communication. And there really is a lot left to learn, enough that I participated in a second study, and then a third. Apparently, I say really, really still. And it's a research line that I'm really interested in learning more about. So really, this is your brain on sex. Well, my brain on sex. Probably yours too. And there's really a lot more secrets that the orgasm holds. And in the next 5 to 10 years, I think we're going to learn a lot more about them. Thank you.